Nsem-Pii TV nie.
Your number one Nsem-Pii TV and Augusu a Ohwe a Augusu a Otie and Semono Boba na Bobodiba. And you may and can so cry the Abraham who and Samone near to Trasem and Niamo NDC food soldiers be Akwakoye or the Honorable John Peter former MP the Mahoho in Fie. Ojen ho awon tiasie it looks as if say coup determine esi organo say edin on tiasie. Recent now more can a lot of questions are being asked. Now voter region hono member of parliament the man of Tongu Samuel Okudzeto Ablakwa Mr. Holier than thou ononkwan on the opegane yi ononkwan no nim papa ononkwan no nim yetene nyumrei ewia nyumrei Nsem-Pii TV ensa kan video bi chese awreho asefem na eni branso aba Samuel Okudzeto Ablakwa na NDC supporters bi ebi free voter region ebi free Ashanti region ebi free Accra eno mu nyina akwa mu ewo ministries with the hope say omo mrahye bedwani ya na NDC ni mapaya on there bibia wagyeegyinem se Ghana ha de on dwene Ghana fo ho won dwene timamufo ho abiri bia waye krado se obeye niema de aboa wo no komo kɔ no ho eno na kwa kodi nkomo de omo nsɛm bi akwa kɔto nanim na mrahye bedwani omo bi de boa wo mo a wahwɛ na waboa wo na areho sem ne se de Okudzeto Ablakwa esi tete ne ho gu omo so twifa wo mo so kyese wanhwɛ omanum po no omankasa wanti omasɛm omo nsɛm kora na wankyia wansere anhwɛ omanim puha twifa omo so kokotena ne kam ka ne ka gate hwim pan kachen driver ne se driver tia so ne enko avum driver no etu eye Rolls Royce car yi o se Chrysler so otu ya o de kwa kyese NDC supporters no mpanifo wo mu gina hono no se edi na papa yi opeso okiri eni omu bufu yi pa roche no se kebe ya omu betimi na keka nsin bat omu ye ya anye yi na in the video no otise Samuel Okudzeto Ablakwa enka kire NDC supporters yi se mo pesa mo ne me kasa me no obi ankasa wa hano opeso oni mi di nkomo a ko ne koko book appointment ansa na opeso oni mi hia oni ma hia no mo say MP da ben na wo chance ye book appointment aben na wo chance ye ka kire se ma wo me book appointment unya ma ba mu nya sa na wo ne kan ye o ka kire se mo de mo ba the MPP 4 years we book appointment wo Okudzeto Ablakwa emri bu make allegation say cash for president ube 2 years can sign not me book appointment akwa ko president na mo de mo ba mu ntimi nya sa mo ya hobrasiefo you are not arrogant it mu nya sa den na wo ba ye uni 3 months kra ye kasa ho a wo so ntie tie de pese ye kan so wo mfie nya ha ne no be kasa mu konko book appointment say odi won sample na e kire wo hwe ni ni kasa NDC supporters si omumunu ya kum omo se kai yedi nsem hunu sabi ya hwe ya de eba no ani soso na in the video what is any supporters ne kasa hi politicians as I said the NDC fanatics and the NDC apparatchiks wo mu Okudzeto Ablakwa the numerous exposés any allegations no ne ye almost say ebia oba to seek their welfare na say no so no relate no sa no so no ba be relate no enye sa akora na e ba beko na mu ba ko na abetro e de atom social media say so my minister can't serve me unless I come to his office. Can he be of service to all Ghanaians if we decide to book an appointment with him? Didn't he answer an oath to serve the Ghanaian people at all times? We no questions or much as he be so Okudzeto Ablakwa. Okudzeto, what didn't see I can tell say at all times. All means all. Whether it's at your convenience or it's at your inconvenience, you are going to make time to serve the good people of Ghana. And then umpoye NDC for yaba honoma hwenungwasia waguyi hwedwa wadane de de ankyere aye omo ye pa so Okudzeto Ablakwa umpoye free voter region tidal waves ya eba eseye dan NPP time ye tinsem aka ye de ewom ni de anim okay, yam, we are seeing that is some point people for them fire home to my boy. Ya ukromu for ya bampo se no ba bekasa enka tie yempo ne passe bi ka kire kujeto enfi wo mo so mu yinipa ayure ho omi ehwe video no na afi so Samuel Abugina po ene ye wan fa ne ho anche ne kora John do mani mahama yanko ne ngore.
How do I get an appointment and come to the office? How do I get an appointment and come to the office?
President Mahama has formed arguably one of the biggest or largest governments in the history of our country as it relates to the cost on the national exchequer. Mr. Speaker, why do I say this? Take for example, the president has appointed Dr. Valerie Sawyer as senior presidential advisor in charge of government affairs. Her rank is a cabinet minister who doubles as a member of parliament. So her salary, her emolument, conditions of service, everything to do with her office is at the same rank as a cabinet minister who doubles as a member of parliament. The Speaker, he's appointed a presidential advisor on economy, appointed presidential advisor for 24-hour economy, presidential advisor in special aid to the president, presidential advisor on national anti-corruption program, presidential advisor on diaspora affairs. Mr. Speaker, he goes on to appoint presidential advisor, presidential staffer, and special aid to the vice president, presidential staffer for Black Star Experience, and then presidential staffer for diaspora affairs. Mr. Speaker, then he goes ahead to appoint 5 policy advisors to the vice president. Mr. Speaker, he tells the country that he's appointed a minister in charge of agribusiness, and yet he's appointed director at the presidency in charge of agriculture and agribusiness. My good friend Peter Buama Otukono. Mr. Speaker, he says he will not appoint deputy regional ministers, and he appoints 16 presidential staffers in charge of the 16 regions of our country. Mr. Speaker, I want to submit that these presidential staffers in charge of the 16 regions of our country, in essence, as it relates to the cost on the national exchequer, are in fact, indeed, and in substance, deputy ministers of state. Mr. Speaker, he then appoints, Mr. Speaker, listen carefully, please. Mr. Speaker, he then appoints 1 presidential advisor on media, 4 directors of communication at the office of the president, 5 deputy directors of communication, 2 communication specialists, 5 technical communication assistants, 1 media aide, 1 assistant media liaison officer, 1 communications consultant. Let's begin. I've done the mathematics, and I want to submit. Let's begin. I've done the mathematics that I want to submit, and I do this not from a partisan lens, but I do this as somebody who had the privilege and honor to serve as deputy chief of staff. I know how it works. In terms of the cost on the national exchequer, the president has appointed 100 ministers and deputy ministers. The president has established a ministry of youth development. I want to refer the House and my good friend, Honorable, I will tender all of this, Mr. Speaker. I will tender this. I will tender it. But, Mr. Speaker, the Honorable James Agalga, my very good friend, has talked about how the NPP government terminated some appointments. Mr. Speaker, assuming without admitting that that even happened, shouldn't our governance move forward? Shouldn't we have good governance? And indeed, when we promise resetting, what does that mean? But, Mr. Speaker, more importantly, may I refer the House, Mr. Speaker, may I refer the House to Article 191 of our national constitution, which states, and I quote, "A member of the public services shall not be dismissed or removed from office or reduced in rank or otherwise punished without just cause, end quote. Mr. Speaker, we are building a nation, and there are hundreds and thousands of people out there who have lost their jobs. I think our friends from the other side, the Honorable James Agaga, should join us to appeal to the president, just as he took an oath, Mr. Speaker, on the second schedule of our national constitution, where he said, and I quote, to protect and defend the Constitution of the Republic of Ghana, end quote. Article 191 is a provision of the Constitution of Ghana, and the President is enjoined to indeed defend and protect this provision of the Constitution. Mr. Speaker, the President, in the same schedule, swore an oath to do justice to all manner of persons. Some of these people whose appointments have been terminated, some are NDC members, Mr. Speaker. Some are MPP members. Some are non-partisan. Some don't even know what happens in politics. And yet, a president who says he'll be father for all has terminated the appointment. When President Mahama was leaving office, Mr. Speaker, he appointed Mr. Joseph Whittal as the Commissioner for Shraj. He appointed Joseph Nkrumah as Chairman of NCCE. On 23rd December 2016, he appointed Daniel Domevilo as Auditor General. Mr. Speaker, it is not Abu Jinapor, or it is not the minority. It's not the minority, Mr. Speaker, who is giving the president names. No, Mr. Speaker, when you go out there on the streets, it's the Ghanaian youth who are talking about that. That the president promised to create jobs, and yet he's come, and the talk on the street is that Mahama Bako terminations, baby. Mr. Speaker, and that is why they have named him. We haven't named him. The minority hasn't named him. They have named him Terminator number 1. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, we call on the president to rise up to the occasion, to jettison the promises, and Mr. Speaker, and honor his commitments of providing you for the Ghanaian people. What we heard on 27th was a message of lamentations and not a State of the Nation address. Mr. Speaker, thank you for the attention.
Honorable members, we now listen to Honorable Gideon Boaku.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for the opportunity to contribute to the address that was presented to this House by the President. And Mr. Speaker, my good friend and classmate, the Honorable Felix Ofosu-Kwakye, made reference to what Professor Naafoli Sekefio said. And I also want to reference Professor Naafoli Sekefio. She said in one of her books that don't tempt me because I don't have the power to resist temptation. The Honorable Member has gone on a path of putting out some information and data in his attempt to rationalize what we describe as lamentations by the President, and in so doing, some misleading data have been put out. Mr. Speaker, it is important to establish that no government can run the full hog of his or her term without having to deal with some arrears in payments, some unfulfilled promises, and even in some cases, things that were not promised are delivered. But at the end of the day, analysts and scholars have given us indicators that measure whether or not the overall performance was good, moderate, or it was bad. And that analysis is akin to what a physician will do on a patient. You may walk to the hospital as very healthy, but the doctor through laboratory test is able to tell you, because of the level of your temperature, you have headache. And this is what the economists have done for us. And Mr. Speaker, I put this into context to indicate whether or not the economy that has been handed over to President Mahama and the NDC is an economy that is poorly managed or it is not. And the acid test to all of this in political decisions is what is the alternative. President Mahama is 2 months into his government, so we can only measure him in relative terms by comparing what he has inherited with what he left when he once had the opportunity to serve. Mr. Speaker, and I want to carry everybody along. Let's look at some of these indicators and make our own fair judgment, because this is a house of records. President Mahama and the NDC left office in 2016 with a real GDP growth of 3.4%. This is when the IMF had given a target of 5.4%, and even the previous year, 2015, was 4%. And yet, President Mahama ended up with a declined growth of 3.4%. Today, the economy that he says is not in good shape has growth for third quarter of 2024 of 6.4% and is going to exceed the IMF target of 4% by the end of the year.
Here, here.
Mr. Speaker, the Honorable Felix talked about fiscal deficit and said it measures the prudence in government expenditure, and I agree with him. They left office in 2016 with a non-rebased fiscal deficit of 9.3% and a rebased fiscal deficit of 6.5%. Today, the fiscal deficit is around 4.2%, leaving a deficit of 6.45%, and the one who left a deficit of 4.2%, who has managed the economy better. But you see, that aside, the primary balance determines the fiscal health of any economy. And Mr. Speaker, it is interesting to note that President Mahama left the economy in the health of the negatives, a primary deficit of 1.4%. Today, our deficit is, our fiscal balance, primary balance is in the surplus. So if you're talking about data, you have to support what you say with data. And interestingly, Mr. Speaker, Ghana has had an all-time high of primary balance of 1.59% in 2021. But shockingly, our all-time low in terms of our primary balance was recorded in 2014 under President Mahama.
Wow.
All-time low, wow. Since independence. Primary balance, all-time low. Mr. Speaker, he talked about debt to GDP ratio. The debt to GDP ratio, non-rebased, when they left office, was 73%. The 55.6% they talk about is after the 2018 rebasing. Today, the non-rebased debt to GDP ratio is 72%. Yeah. It's lower than what you left in terms of non-rebased. Wait for next year when the statistical service rebases our GDP to see whether the debt to GDP ratio will not be below what you left. That is the most important thing. Mr. Speaker, again, our current account balance, which records your international transactions, including exports and imports, was in the deficit during President Mahama's time when he left office in 2016. Today, it is in the surplus. Mr. Speaker, our gross international reserves was 6.2 billion. Today, it is 8.9 billion. It covered 3.5 months of imports cover. Today, it is covering 4 months of imports cover. Which of these two is the best? And you talk about exchange rate depreciation. Yes, our cedi naturally had a characteristic feature of undergoing depreciation because of the regime that we practice. But they left an exchange rate depreciation from 2009 to 2016 of 72%. What President Akufo-Addo left is 71%. Which one is the best? Which one is the best? So that is important to note. Mr. Speaker, this is an indication. This is an indication that the economy is doing well. But Mr. Speaker, a relatively strong economy is what? It is the one that is able to provide infrastructure, that is able to provide jobs, healthcare, pay salaries, provide stable electricity, and all of that. Mr. Speaker, the government that President Mahama is inheriting has laid solid foundations. And Mr. Speaker, it is based on this solid foundation that the government has been able to reduce the number of young people who are not employed by 2.13 million. President Mahama has a responsibility to reduce that further. Today, we have seen the growth in the agriculture sector and our exports are increasing. That is why we are having a trade surplus. For the first time, we are recording trade surplus.
Be the first to know Nsem-Pii TV.